Hi folks, Peps here. Today we're talking about pedagogical alignment. Pedagogical alignment? Today we're talking about alignment and codification. Alignment is when multiple teachers within a school all use the same routines and norms. Now we're not talking about subject-specific stuff, but more generic things like how students enter and exit the classroom, how we distribute resources, how teachers call for attention, or how we check for understanding. Now, for a long time I thought it didn't really matter whether teaching within a school was aligned or not, that it should just be left up to the individual. But over the last few years, I've realized that it's been a consistently common feature across pretty much every single one of the best schools I've worked with. And there's also increasing evidence to back up the idea that alignment is a kind of secret sauce for strong school performance. For example, there was a nice paper published just a couple of months ago which looked at 20,000 schools in the US, which is as many as we have in total in the UK, and they found that the best performing schools, those in the top 5% of the distribution, tended to have much stronger alignment across the board. Not only through consistently effective teaching, but also through more coherent curricula and a greater sense of belonging across students and staff. And these schools were having a seriously positive impact. The students were learning on average an additional 3 months worth of extra content per year compared to average schools in the sample. Over time, that kind of progress ends up having a significant impact on young people's ability to achieve their goals in the future. It's not something to be downplayed at all. And this lines up with another cracking study released last year by our very own super hunk, Professor Sam Sims, on behalf of CST, which looked at high-performing networks of schools in the US and found that one of the main reasons they were so effective was basically down to really tightly shared high expectations alongside a consistently implemented whole school approach to behaviour. So what's going on here? How exactly does alignment end up leading to more effective schooling? Let's talk to a couple of super smart school leaders to try and find out more. Hi folks, we're here at CST Annual Conference 2024 and I'm talking to Jen Barker, who is National Director of Learning at Ormiston Academy Trust, and John Gilbert, who's National Director of a whole bunch of things, which I can't remember, at Two Counties Trust.
You know, teachers just in classrooms over are trying to grapple with, the act of teaching, which we know is incredibly complex. So by having that shared starting point, you provide the basis for, you still have to work really hard at these things, but the basis for opportunities to collaborate, opportunities for peer observation, and those interactions I think become much richer because of the shared starting point. So I know that you're trying to achieve this, or you then might come and see me model that same thing, and then we might have a conversation about it. So I mean, for me, I think the other beneficiaries are pupils. We know that pupils find, if there's a different set of rules and expectations and processes and systems in place, and this, again, it speaks to the equity piece from the pupil perspective, that's incredibly demanding for pupils who, might find school typically more easier. For our more vulnerable pupils, I think this stuff is even more important because you're creating a shared expectation, consistency of routine, and you are thereby reducing the cognitive load of those individuals in that moment and actually increasing the likelihood that they will be able to focus on that which matters most to their learning.
So there's a couple of things that Jen said that I'd like to unpack a bit further. The first is this idea of having shared routines. Now, routines are a really powerful thing in school because once they're established, they enable students to deploy less of their very precious limited attention to the process of learning. What should I do now? What's going to happen next? And as a result, they can focus more on the content of our learning, which is the thing we want them paying attention to, right? The only problem is that routines take time to become established. Evidence suggests that it can take weeks or even months, depending on how often we run that routine. But there is a shortcut. When multiple teachers within a school all run the same routine, and that means pretty much the same actions using the same cue, students end up experiencing that routine with much greater frequency within a given time frame, and as a result, the time it takes them to adopt the routine becomes rapidly accelerated. A similar kind of effect emerges around social norms. When teachers within a school have different norms, different expectations, different rules, different ways of doing things, those norms will interfere with and reduce each other's effectiveness. Whereas when multiple teachers within a school all have the same norms, those norms will reinforce and amplify each other. And as Jen said, consistent routines and norms create a more familiar and predictable environment, which not only increases feelings of belonging, which boosts motivation and well-being, but is particularly appreciated by our more vulnerable students, such as those with special educational needs. And finally, when there are a consistent set of routines and norms across a school, not only does it reduce workload and the behaviour burden, but it also makes it so much easier for new staff joining the school. All they have to do is learn the cue, and the chances that students respond in a productive way is immediately much, much greater. So when we consider all of these somewhat invisible mechanics of schooling, it starts to make sense why alignment is such a secret sauce. When we row together, we go faster and our journey is smoother. Now, how do we go about achieving alignment? Let's jump back to Jen and John to tell us more.
Codification, like what is it and why is it important for the system?
So I think codification is important because it takes that which is abstract, sort of tacit knowledge that we know teachers hold, and it makes it granular and specific. So it is the starting point from which we create a shared language, a shared set of models, a shared understanding essentially of the very granular and specific practices that we think teachers might most effectively employ as part of their practice.
Can you give me an example?
So we talk about teachers needing to build high quality relationships or have presence in the classroom, and those they may be true, but for a novice teacher and an experienced teacher, knowing how to have presence, what exactly it means to have presence, can be a very daunting. It's like the old adage of telling the comedian to be funnier. If they knew how to do those things, they'd probably be doing them in the first place. So by breaking, turning a concept like building strong relationships or the notion of teacher presence, and turning it into a series of codified, practices which you can write down, you can observe, you can teach, you can practice, you can receive feedback on, we are much more likely to see individuals develop those, capacities and build them into their sort of general teaching repertoire.
And really, the risk of not doing that is that knowledge is lost, is dead. Once a teacher retires, say in your school, but they've got so much contextual expertise in your school, if that's not codified or that person's not videoed and that's part of your codification, once they leave, that's gone.
How would a school or trust begin to go about codifying, trying to build alignment in practice?
As part of our education priorities, we've identified foci like strong starts, calm closes, securing attention, and we're working with schools in a collective way to teach specific strategies. There's flexibility from the school's perspective around which kind of specific strategies they choose, but to work with them to teach, give them particular sort of focus PD inputs, and then use that to provide the basis of some group rehearsal, the use of Step Lab, the way that we use drop-ins, shout-outs and coaching in the Step Lab, and then with opportunities for sort of practice and feedback and hopefully, obviously, over time. We've only just started it this term, but the embedding of those techniques. And then, next term we will move on to driving thought, and so we'll look at a different set of strategies, and we'll, kind of move through the mental model of teaching in that way, stacking, if you like, the practices as we go to make sure that we don't, it's not, you don't move on to one and then forget the other one. It's that sort of constant build as you go.
If we want to realise all the benefits of alignment within our schools, then we've really got to be engaging in effective codification and related professional development. Codification is essentially about taking what we know, ideas, principles, practices, and organising them in a way that's clearly structured and easy for others to understand and use. It's about making the implicit explicit, which lots of schools do by creating their own PD curricula or instructional playbooks for teachers, as it's sometimes called. Codification is not just something new that we've discovered in education. It's a powerful tool that has driven progress across multiple sectors and fields. For example, some super geeky research by Juhas and colleagues argues that the main reason that Japan became an economic superpower was because it systematically codified technical knowledge during the Meiji era. If alignment is the secret sauce of school effectiveness, then it seems that codification is its magic ingredient. Now, all this sounds a bit too good to be true. Surely there must be a catch.
Like, does this not kind of get in the way of teacher autonomy? What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
this potentially controversial issue?
The notion of autonomy is an incredibly nebulous construct, which actually, if you ask 5 people what autonomy means, they'll tell you 5 different things. If you were to ask a doctor, or if a doctor was to treat you and say, I'm not going to use the NICE guidelines to inform my practice because it's threatening my autonomy. I mean, you would be appalled. I think what people are getting at, and perhaps what might be a closer term to what we are trying to achieve, is agency. And that's the ability of an individual in that moment to make the best decision about what's best for their pupils. That is absolutely essential. And we shouldn't do anything which threatens, in my opinion, a teacher's ability to do that.
In many ways, I actually think that alignment supports autonomy. It reduces the behaviour burden, and by automating standard aspects of practice, it enables teachers to devote more of our precious time and attention to thinking about the curriculum and our students and the interaction between these two things in the moment, which is basically the nexus of progress in schools, right? However, I do appreciate that some people will just want to be able to do things their own way. And so there's an important conversation that probably needs to happen if you're considering pursuing alignment around the trade-offs between the needs of the individual and all of the benefits of the collective. If you've had that conversation and you come down on the side of alignment, how do you get started?
I think getting into schools who are doing this really well. It's like what we know about modelling, talking to people who have thought about this stuff. I've been into a number of schools and seeing it firsthand, I think is incredibly valuable.
Drawing on resources that are already available. So we've already mentioned things like Step Lab or Teach Like a Champion. These things exist, and getting together with colleagues and thinking, right, well, look, this is the problem we want to solve in our school. Here is best practice that's already out there. How can we contextualise that for us, use language that we might want to use, etc., etc. And that's the way forward, yeah.
And that's a wrap for today. In summary, the alignment of generic aspects of practice across a school seem to generate a range of benefits, both for staff and for students, and particularly our most vulnerable students. For example, it allows routines to become established more quickly, norms to have a more powerful effect, and new teachers to have an easier time at the start of their careers. To achieve alignment, we need to think carefully about codification, which is all about making the implicit explicit, and organising professional development around this. And a good place to get started is by going to visit schools who are already part way down this path, and by getting your hands on some codification resources, such as Teach Like a Champion, 3.0 is probably best, the Teaching and Learning Playbook, and of course, the wonderful and amazing Step Lab. I hope that's been useful. Make sure you subscribe, share, thumbs up, tweet, who knows, okay? And I'll see you next time.